Thank you very much indeed for your welcome and for your introduction, and thank you to the EAS for commissioning the research team to undertake this study. The research was conducted with a consortium from Birmingham City University, University of the West of Scotland, and Cardiff Metropolitan University. So while I'm making the presentation today, it does reflect the efforts of a larger team, and it would be remiss of me not to acknowledge the contributions of my co-researchers, which include Dr. Carol Bignall, who's with us in the hall today, played a very important role in the interview strand. Jeff Wood at Birmingham City, who was the statistician attached to the project, and Gary Beecham at Cardiff, who was the project co-director. And of course, the team also owes an enormous debt of thanks to all of those teachers who gave their time to complete the time use diary and those that participated in the follow-up interviews as well. So it's always extremely difficult to ask busy professionals for some of their time, but to ask them for that time on the topic of workload, we really did appreciate the effort and the commitment that colleagues showed us. And I'm hoping that a PowerPoint has appeared there. I'm going to have to take you back to a horrible COVID period and manually signal when we want the slides to turn. So if that's triggering for anybody, I apologize to that. So if we move on to our second slide, please. Okay, so what were we asked to do? What did we set out to do? So the research addressed the following research questions. We were commissioned to establish what the main activities are that constitute teacher workload, what the balance of this workload is across the working week, the full week, and what extra hours were teachers doing beyond their contractual hours, and where did these workload demands come from? But before embarking upon the empirical work, the field work for the study, we conducted a research and policy review that considered workload in relation to some key factors. And those factors were, which we've heard a lot about this morning as well. So teacher numbers, professional development, learner needs, behaviour, and school accountability policies. So next slide, please. Okay, so clearly workload is linked to teacher and support staff numbers. Now, if recruitment to ITE programmes is an indicator of the status and the attractiveness of the teaching profession, then there might be recent cause for concern, particularly with regard to secondary ITE in Scotland. So ITE intake numbers have fallen year on year from 2020. So while we've heard a lot about that pledge to increase teacher numbers, we know that teacher numbers fell across 17 local authorities last year. And as we've just been hearing, the rate of post-induction teachers who are finding and securing full-time employment is now at its lowest level since 2012. Next slide, please. Okay, so on the positive note, there's a really ambitious model of extended professionalism in Scotland. Teachers are formally positioned as curriculum makers with a strong commitment to career-long professional learning. But clearly, in order to fulfil that role, they need the time and space to do that well. And several reports, as listed on the slide, have expressed concern about the opportunities and support that are available for the professional growth of teachers. So the Independent Panel on Career Pathways for Teachers noted a need for time to teachers to undertake professional learning. The Priestley report, the review on national qualifications, workload was cited there in relation to concerns around moderation. The OECD investigation or review of Curriculum for Excellence highlighted need to streamline the volume of curriculum guidance that was flowing into schools and to strengthen the support for teachers with ring-fenced time to enable them to engage with curriculum planning. And most recently, the GTCS submission to the Muir Review called for a fundamental rethink on teaching commitments to consider the time and space for teacher learning. So why is professional learning so important? Which is the next slide. Okay, teachers are facing increasing rates and a wider range of learner needs. Now, this can include cultural diversity, linguistic diversity, cognitive or neurodiversity. As those needs escalate and multiply, teachers need the time and support to respond to this well. Between 2010 and 2023, the percentage of pupils with an identified additional support need rose from 10% to 37%. And yet, over the same period, we know the number of ASN teachers in Scotland was falling. In 2013, each ASN teacher was supporting 40 pupils, but last year this had risen to 89 pupils. There's been a 33% drop in spending per ASL pupil. Now, you can't have that without having consequences for teachers' workload. Next slide, please. Okay, teachers also report a decline in pupil behaviour, which is associated with deprivation, trauma, adverse childhood experiences, and unmet additional needs. Now, many of these needs existed before the pandemic, and they were certainly deepened and exacerbated following the pandemic. The most recent EIS survey found violence and aggression towards teachers have increased significantly following the pandemic. The 2023 Behaviour in Scottish Schools research report also notes an increase in classroom disengagement behaviours and low-level and serious disruptive incidents, such to the extent that 38% of primary teachers and 48% of secondary teachers report spending between 1 and 3 hours each week dealing with the same pupils who present challenging behaviour. Okay, on to another familiar theme for many of you, I'm sure. The next slide, please. Tackling unnecessary bureaucracy in teaching, by which I mean excessive paperwork and form filling, is a persistent and enduring challenge, as we can see over a number of years. So too much bureaucracy takes time away from the core tasks of teaching. And teachers want to concentrate on what matters most and has clear educational value to them. So back in 2017 the Education Governance Review pointing out that excessive bureaucracy and unproductive workload is detracting away from the time of teachers and head teachers should be committing to teaching and learning within their classrooms and schools. So that's the background to the study. In the next section, I'm going to explain what it is exactly that we did and what we found out. Okay, so we used a sequential mixed method design. The main data sources, as I said, were an online time use diary accompanied by some quantitative and qualitative survey questions, and we followed that up with some in-depth semi-structured interviews. Now, the pre-coded activities that were listed in the time use diary were generated in close consultation with 2 volunteer teacher panels. So again, I express our thanks to those teacher panels who played a really important role in January and February, making sure that the time categories we used were relevant, that the tool itself was accessible as it could be to very busy professionals in schools, and it also reduced the risk of partial completion. Having done the literature review, we realised how important it was for us to include a perceived stress scale as well, a job satisfaction scale, and a teacher time poverty scale. A time poverty scale measures the manageability of your workload, what you've got to achieve within the time that's available to you. And teachers were asked to complete the workload diary for the full calendar week beginning March the 4th. So the full within school hours, within the school day, into the evenings and across the weekend as well. An enormous thank you to everybody who took the time to do that. So on to the response rate. Okay, we had a very good response. The diary and the survey questions were completed by 1,834 teachers employed right across the 32 local authorities of Scotland. Now, the details of this are in the main report, but I can assure you that there was a very close match in terms of demographic and school characteristics of the teachers who responded to this piece of research to the overall population of teachers in Scotland as reported in the summary statistics for schools in Scotland from last year. So a very close match. We can have confidence there. And in addition to that, 40 teachers employed across 26 local authorities participated in a remote interview of up to 45 minutes towards the end of March and throughout April as well. So you can see from the tables on the slide that they are mainly main grade teachers. We have a good representation from primary and secondary, and we have a good reputation in terms of locality and settings as well, from urban schools through to island schools as well. So I'm going to start now by looking at the findings in relation to within contracted hours. So this is the distribution of work across the contractual 35-hour working week. So it'll be no surprise that teachers who are primarily classroom-based were spending 2/3 of that teaching time on face-to-face learning interactions in classrooms. But I guess for me what's most notable about that statistic is it means that they spent a further 1/3 of their time within the classroom dealing with other matters. So minor disruptions, significant behavioural interruptions were taking up to 48% of all face-to-face teaching time across roles within schools. And of course, those behavioural issues in class create administrative follow-up activities outside lessons, where teachers have to report incidents, communicate them to parents and carers, communicate with colleagues, and to liaise with external agencies. Unsurprisingly, the majority of the rest of the non-contact time is on planning, preparing lessons, marking, and feedback. Teachers were keen to note, though, that their planning was made more complicated and more intense because of the higher rates of pupil absence and intermittent attendance, which required additional preparation to maintain learning for those pupils who were away from the classroom in other within-school provision or who were at home. Okay, it was really important to the research team that you didn't just hear our interpretation of what teachers were saying to us, but that you could hear them in terms of teachers' own words. So the next slide gives an overview of the intensity within the working week that the teachers were reporting. So I won't read that out, I'll just give you a moment to read those. Okay, so you can see there that teachers are describing that there simply isn't any downtime. Their time taken up outside the classroom on doing referrals, covering for colleagues who are unexpectedly absent. So the next slide, please. Okay, so it's clear then that addressing the needs of all learners within contracted hours is becoming more and more challenging. Planning and preparation challenges were most acute amongst interviewees who were teaching composite classes, cross-phase teachers, teachers of technical subjects, and subjects with just one teacher. But across sectors and regions, teachers commented as well on how much of their role was now taken up with data entry. And you can see from the extract from the principal teacher there that reporting and monitoring had just seemed to explode, and that their role was very much largely taken up with that, and they were constantly engaged in a cycle of catching up but not feeling that they'd accomplished anything, just running to maintain but not feeling that they were progressing because of their workload. Thank you. Okay, so again, I want to say this isn't a superficial level. These were very, very deep seams within a very rich database. These are not a hand-selected illustrative quotes. They are very, very typical of the comments that teachers were making. As you see, that the available time is just overwhelmed by the level of need that teachers were facing. So if we move on to the outside contracted hours now, so this is the time that is above and beyond the 35-hour working week, which is where our 46 hours comes from. So on average, teachers reported spending a further 11.39 hours outside of contracted hours on work-related activity that they need to undertake in the morning before going into work, into the evening when they get home from work, and at home in the weekends as well. And what's most concerning about the data here is that the activities that consume the largest time commitment outside, above and beyond the 35 hours are the absolutely essential core activities that are integral to any teacher's role. So planning and preparing lessons, preparing resources, marking and feedback for pupils, which simply cannot be accomplished within the 35-hour week, but were routinely spilling over into evenings and weekends. And on average, teachers were spending almost 4 hours on work-related activity in the weekend. There's also a very clear relationship in the data between the level of work beyond contracted hours and the rates of stress that were being reported by teachers. So work beyond contracted hours was the strongest predictor of perceived stress. And this isn't just occupational stress, but stress that is experienced in other aspects of teachers' lives. Okay, on to access outside school hours. Now, there was some good practice. Some schools and school leaders set very, very clear parameters on the availability and the expectations that staff would be available beyond into the evenings, into the weekends, into the holidays. But that certainly wasn't universal. That wasn't, unfortunately, always the case. So there was the perception that you were available 24/7, that there was no downtime. Teachers valued the use of digital tools like Microsoft Teams, Google Classroom, WhatsApp. It enabled them to manage their workload beyond the classroom, but they were also very aware that that had the potential to significantly extend working hours as well. So it was useful and valuable, but also made them susceptible to even longer working hours. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, many of the interviewees commented on the negative impact of excess working hours on their family life, to the extent that some questioned whether teaching could still be regarded, or could be regarded, as a family-friendly occupation. So women, but men teachers as well, talked about being at home, being in the same building as their families, but working at home and not spending time with their own children, and how far they were relying on their partners to sustain other aspects of family life. Many interviewees spoke of withdrawing from social and leisure activities because of their escalating work commitments. And challenges were most acute for those who had dependents, so teachers with younger children, teachers who had caring responsibilities. And beyond the actual time that they were spending working at home, many of the teachers were simply exhausted. They were tired. They felt that the time that they had at the weekend couldn't be spent in leisure, but was recuperation time. It was rest recovery before going at it again the next week and waiting for the Sunday emails to come in. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, it's not surprising that the working hours teachers report are linked to their job satisfaction. So the job satisfaction scale showed a clear correlation between working time in the evenings and a decline in job satisfaction. So the more people worked in the evening, the less satisfied they were with their career. And that really matters because it influences teachers' career decisions, whether they're going to seek promotion, whether they're going to move schools to get a more acceptable work-life balance, if they're going to move out of school education into other education-related work, or indeed whether they're going to exit the classroom altogether. So several teachers reported that they would no longer be seeking promotion. They'd seen how hard their principal teacher, their head teachers worked, and they didn't feel that that was sustainable, or they didn't feel that that would work within their family circumstances. We spoke to principal teachers who were thinking of, who had already demitted their principal teacher role because of the workload manageability issues. And we spoke to many teachers who had considered leaving the profession, and not for graduate level occupations, leaving the profession altogether. So it wasn't a monetary driver that was pushing them from teaching. So next slide, please. Okay, so in summary, what can this research show us? It shows that teachers in Scotland, as is also the case in comparable national education systems, are currently facing a perfect storm, increased job demands in the face of declining organisational support. Those core activities that are absolutely integral to a teacher's role, planning, preparation, marking, simply cannot be accomplished within the 35-hour week, and routinely are spilling over into mornings before work, evenings, and into weekends. The profession is facing greater behaviour and attendance issues, increased learner needs, more complex additional support needs, all at a time of contracting resources. The final slide, please. So what can we conclude? The research findings in this report indicate that a sustained and serious policy focus on excess working time and occupational well-being is timely. The study provides very little support for the effectiveness of workload reduction strategies to date. In fact, we find that working hours are rising. Declining job quality and workload manageability will have significant implications for the quality of education for children and young people in Scotland's schools, and also for the sustainability of teaching. We clearly need to know more about the relationship between prolonged working hours and increased job demands, and the impact that's having on falling recruitment patterns, teacher mobility, and attrition rates, to examine the push and pull factors in teaching. But also teacher workload and wellbeing needs to be considered within whole system strategies to improve educational outcomes. Frontline teachers can't be expected to manage this entirely on their own. So increased staffing numbers and increased support in terms of non-contact time and access to timely specialist expertise and rigorous development opportunities are needed to promote the quality of education in Scotland's schools and to make sure that teaching remains an attractive and sustainable career choice. But I did want to say that although the workload challenges facing teachers make this a bleak report, the professional commitment that was expressed by the teachers who participated in the interviews and gave their time to put fulsome qualitative statements in response to the survey questions indicates a profession that is working above and beyond to deliver the best possible outcomes for students at no insufficient personal cost to themselves and to their families. So again, a thank you to everybody who completed the survey and to participated in the interviews. So I hope to leave on a positive note in an otherwise quite bleak report, so thank you.